Hello students, today we will be discussing the topic gender as a determinant of voting behavior in India. The objective for today's discussion is to give you an understanding of the nature of voting behavior among women in India, to give you an insight about how caste, class, religion influences the voting behavior of women across variables, to also give you an understanding of the rationale behind the high percentage of women voters since the 1990s. To facilitate our understanding of the topic, I have divided the entire discussion into a number of segments. We would start off with women as a determinant of voting behavior. Next, we would focus on the reasons behind the low representation of women in national and state legislative bodies. Thirdly, we would focus on the voting trends in elections. Fourthly, we will focus on the factors leading to high voting trends among women. Next, we would take up an important area, that is spatial factors determining women voters. And finally, students, are women vote banks in India? Now, before we move on to this determinant of women as a category of voters, let us try to understand the importance of women in a representative democracy. It is believed that political participation along with voting behavior are the most critical ingredients of a democracy. A truly functioning democracy necessitates the wholehearted participation of the entire body of citizens. In fact, this is the essence of universal adult suffrage. The concept of political equality, which is one man, one vote, one value, is of supreme significance in a representative democracy. It is argued that women as equal citizens should be given prime importance in a democracy, and they should share equally with men public decision making. Otherwise, there is a democratic deficit. Among the different variables like caste, class, religion, gender, studying the voting pattern of women is necessary to understand how women vote. Students, it is imperative to note that women is not a uniform category. Rather, the needs and dynamics of voting behavior varies across women belonging to different classes, castes, religions, and even women in rural and urban India vote differently. Now, to understand the voting behavior of women, it is imperative to note the trends in India about the voting behavior among women and men. It is interesting to note that in the 17th Lok Sabha elections held in 2019, the highest number of women parliamentarians were elected. For the first time in the history of Indian Lok Sabha, around 78 MPs were elected. There were around 716 women candidates contesting from different parties and regions. Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal have elected the most number of women parliamentarians, that is 11 each, followed by Maharashtra with 8 MPs, Orissa with 7 MPs and Gujarat with 6 women legislators to the Lok Sabha. Among the political parties, the Bharatiya Janata Party or the BJP has the most number of women winners, 41, or nearly 14% of its elected members in the Lok Sabha. The BJP is followed by All India Trinamool Congress, which has 9 women representatives, and they had fielded 41% women candidates, unprecedented for any election ever in the history of Indian democracy. These parties were followed by Congress, which has 7 women MPs, that is 13.5% of its total 52 MPs, followed by YSR Congress, which has 4 women MPs and they constitute 18% of the 22 MPs in the Lok Sabha. Next in line is the Biju Janata Dal, which has 4 women MPs in the Lok Sabha, which is 33% of its 12 elected MPs in the Lok Sabha. Representation of women MPs in the 2019 elections in terms of the total strength of the House, has seen as improvement from 11% in 2014 to 14% in 2019. Now, 14% is not a very happy figure in terms of women's representation. The question is, in the last so many decades of the functioning of Indian democracy and as the largest functioning Indian democracy, why is it there are so few women legislators in the Lok Sabha? We need to understand the reasons behind the same. Political and sociological research on the reasons behind the low representation of women in Indian parliaments have pointed out to a number of socio-political and economic reasons. The most important of them are the fact that the socio-historic forces inherited from the nationalist movements, the current social policies, and the gendered nature of citizenship account for low representation of women. The second reason behind the low representation of women in national legislatures is the absence of reservation of seats for women in the national parliament and the state legislatures. There is another very important reason, and that is the lack of national consensus and unwillingness among political parties to give more tickets to women. Perpetuation of patriarchal political structures acting together with caste, class and gender subordination are strong deterrents for women to contest elections in India. And this has been identified in the 1998 baseline report. Another important reason is the lack of awareness and knowledge of electoral politics, with insufficient support from family and political parties in terms of resources also severely impacts women's chances to contest and win elections. Gender discriminatory policies followed by national and regional parties in allotting seats to women in electoral competitions also account for low number of women representatives in the national parliament. Now, apart from these reasons, there are a couple of other factors which contribute to low representation. They are women's involvement in political and electoral competition have become confined to familial connections rather than being based on interest and societal encouragement to actively participate in politics. We are referring to the concept of dynastic politics in here, and where women belonging to strong party dynasties have actually played an important role in representing their respective constituencies. Political parties reflecting the prevailing societal ethos have actually failed to address the issue and have systematically excluded women from electoral participation. Despite constitutional provisions guaranteeing equality of both the sexes, the demand for greater representation of women in political institutions in India was taken up only after the report of the Committee on the Status of Women in India, Government of India Report 1974. This suggested that women's representation in political institutions, especially at the grassroots level, needed to be increased through a policy of reservation of seats for women. Now, the issue of reservation of seats for women across all tiers of representation has been taken up in a number of constitutional deliberations. However, nothing much has happened except the fact that the 73rd and the 74th Constitution Amendment Act have provided for 33% reservation of women in Panchayati Raj institutions and local government bodies. This has been implemented in almost all the states of India without evoking any hostility or opposition from male politicians or society at large. In 1995, the question of affirmative action for women was raised again. This time, focus was on reservation of women in the Indian Parliament. Initially, most parties agreed to this demand in principle. However, dissensions soon surfaced. When the bill addressing this issue was introduced in the 11th Parliament in 1997, several political parties and groups raised objections regarding issues of elite women being elected to the Indian Parliament, and overlapping quotas for women, and what will happen to lower caste women? Will they be able to represent themselves in the Indian Parliament? The proposed bill introduced almost 20 years ago in the Parliament is still gathering dust, and there are no clear indications whether it will see the light of the day anytime soon or not. Now, while women continue to be underrepresented in national and state legislatures, there has been an upsurge in the number of women voters in the recent decades. So much so that in the recently concluded Lok Sabha elections held in 2019, the percentage of men and women voters are almost the same. Though there was a slight decrease in voting of women in the general elections of 2004 as compared with 1999, women's participation in the electoral process as voters has steadily increased from 46.6% in 1962 to around 65.6% in 2014. The difference in voter turnout among men and women that was as wide as 16.7% in 1952 has now narrowed to 1.54% in 2014. In the 17th Lok Sabha elections held in 2019, the number of women voters outnumbered men in 13 states. This is indeed very interesting. Earlier, these trends were visible only in India's northeastern and southern states and some union territories. But in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, northern states like Bihar, Uttarakhand also joined the league of more women voters than men. The surge may be because of better representation and better electoral awareness campaign provided by the Election Commission of India. Between 2009 and 2014, 39 million voters were registered. Now, it is believed that women voters are enthusiastic about participating in voting. This could be the reason that many schemes have been introduced by the government for women in recent years. While the Narendra Modi-led present government introduced the Ujjwala scheme for clean cooking fuel, the Congress announced a minimum income program under which money would be transferred in a women's bank account in the family. Experts say that the rise in voters is also because of reservation in panchayat elections and other developmental schemes targeting women. This is not an easy achievement, students, if one considers history. The 1962 Lok Sabha election saw a gap of 16.7% between men and women voters. And 2014 just saw the gap being reduced to 1.5%. This narrowing of the gap proves beyond doubt that more women are exercising their electoral rights. Now, the question is, why is there an upsurge in women voters? Now, there are a couple of factors that could have contributed to this massive upsurge of women voters in recent elections. Firstly, the liberalization and opening up of the Indian economy since the 1990s resulted in proliferation of the electronic media, creating awareness and educating women about their political and electoral rights. Social media has also played a very important role in garnering consciousness and awareness about the need for participating in voting. Secondly, civil society and women's group awareness campaigns and advocacy at grassroots level encouraged and educated women about the importance of voting for the right candidates and the right political parties. Thirdly, the initiatives of the Election Commission of India in conducting free, fair and violence-free elections since the 1990s may have contributed to larger female turnouts, inculcating in them a sense of safety and security. Fourthly, reservation of 33% seats for women in Panchayati Raj institutions in the 1990s gave women a sense of sharing power with men equally. It acted as a catalyst and providing the momentum which resulted in the upsurge of women's electoral participation. Finally, the earlier dominant perception that women generally see politics as dirty and tend to stay away from it saw a meltdown during this period. as a result of women's reservation and participation in large number at the grassroots level Panchayati Raj institutions. Success stories of women in panchayats dispel to some extent the perception that politics is not a women's domain. Now, what are the factors which further influence voting behavior among women? It should be remembered, students, that though there has been an overall upsurge in women voters, yet the number varies across regions. It should be noted that women's involvement in electoral politics depends upon their societal background and the levels of liberty and freedom that they enjoy. Women are also governed by their electoral choices within the family. Women who exercise their own discretion in deciding whom to vote for have higher levels of electoral participation as voters in electoral competition than those women governed by family and peer groups. Voting patterns of women in India are also determined by location and spatial factors. Let us try to understand how women vote across regions. Women living in rural areas vote in higher numbers than women in urban and metropolitan localities. The reasons for low voter turnout among urban women have been sociologically researched and can be broadly put down to time and monetary constraints in reaching polling booths in urban locations. Notably, women in the southern and eastern regions of the country exercise their ballot options more than women in western and northern regions. Moreover, women from the southern and eastern regions voted in 2009, and in fact it has been found that 91% of women voted in South India and 86% women voted in East India compared to the counterparts in North and West India. The reasons for such spatial variations could be many, but may partly be explained by more matriarchal social structures prevalent in southern and eastern India. Such familial structures allow more freedom to women in accessing and negotiating interactions in the public sphere and in the electoral competitions. The next and the most important question: are women vote banks in India? Does the political parties consider women to be an important determinant in their success stories? The recent trends show a positive sign here. Indian women are distinct and independent vote bank on which political parties have already begun to focus in order to win elections. This involves meeting different demands and using different messages given the upsurge in women-centric schemes in both the national and state level elections. In addition to the focus on the needs of women voters, the rising influence of long neglected rural women voters is becoming a new and very important focus of electoral strategy. It is now absolutely clear to all political parties that the key to winning an election is first to win the support of voters in the rural areas, not to speak of the importance of women voters. Hence, the loudest debate in the run-up to the 2019 Lok Sabha elections was how to tackle 1. Farmer distress and a particular focus on women's issues. The rise in rural women voting has been recent, sharp, and has far-reaching consequences. Parties and incumbents are increasingly focusing on women voters. For instance, the distribution of free gas cylinders under the Ujjwala scheme was a calculated move by the NDA to increase its support among rural women voters. Among all post-poll surveys and studies hinted that BJP and allies were able to improve their performance among women in 2019 as against 2014 by the implementation of schemes like Ujjwala, Beti Bachao Beti Padhao, Jan Dhan and Swachh Bharat toilets. It goes without saying that through these schemes, the BJP and the NDA was able to translate votes for the ruling alliance. Let us try to get a glimpse of the party manifestos of some of the important political parties. The 2019 BJP party manifesto had a separate section of women empowerment. It focused on women-led development, affordable and quality education for girls, better employment opportunities for women, women in workforce roadmap. The manifesto also focused on safe motherhood through schemes such as Pradhan Mantri Matri Vandana Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Matritva Suraksha Abhijan and Ayushman Bharat. We will focus on ensuring good quality, easily accessible and affordable maternal healthcare services for all women, the manifesto stated. 33% reservation in parliament and state assemblies through a constitutional amendment was also clearly outlined in the 2019 BJP manifesto. Coming to the Indian National Congress 2019 electoral manifesto. The manifesto had a separate section on women's empowerment and gender justice. The manifesto stated that the Congress, if it came to power, promises to pass the Constitution Amendment Bill to provide for reservation of 33% of seats in the Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies in the first session of the 17th Lok Sabha and in the Rajya Sabha. They also said that reservation for women, 33% of appointment to posts in central government offices. Sufficient night shelters will be built for migrant women workers. Adequate number of safe and hygiene public toilets for women will be provided in towns and cities. The manifesto also promises to expand ICDS and provide creche in every Anganwadi center based on need and demand. Let us come to this year's 2021 West Bengal State Legislative Assembly elections. In the 2021 West Bengal Legislative Assembly elections, the major contending parties were the TMC and the BJP. Now, in order to understand whether women played an important role in the West Bengal Legislative Assembly elections, it is imperative to understand what is the percentage of women voters in West Bengal. Women voters constitute 49% of poll-bound West Bengal draft electorate. Elections to the 294 West Bengal Assembly seats were held in April-May this year. Of the 7.18 crore voters, 3.15 crore were women, a number neither party could ignore. This renewed focus on women voters comes in the backdrop of statistics showing that women had swung the Bihar Assembly elections in the NDA's favor. While the women voters were firmly behind the Mamata Banerjee-led TMC, many of their loyalties shifted to the BJP in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, prompting the ruling TMC government to launch initiatives to lure the women back to the party. For the first time, a new scheme was being launched, and this was provided in the TMC manifesto. What was the scheme? Female heads of 1.6 crore households will benefit from a universal monthly income support. Female heads of general category families will be provided Rs 500 monthly, and SC/ST families will be provided Rs 1000. The BJP also made a similar promise of a 7th pay commission implementation for state government employees and 33% reservation for women in state government jobs if it came to power. Other than reservation and free education for women, the promise list announced to increase widow pension to 3,000 rupees from 1,000 currently, and setting up of 12 battalion comprising women only. The BJP also promised free KG to PG education for all women and free travel for them in public transport. Political speeches, campaigns, manifestos were directed at women more than ever in the West Bengal Assembly elections. In West Bengal, several women-centric schemes were announced. Most importantly, the Shastro Sati scheme with names of female heads of family earned accolades. The TMC also highlighted several women-centric schemes introduced, like the Kanya Shri, Ruposhri direct cash transfer scheme to prevent child marriage, and the Shastro Sati scheme. There was another important element introduced, and that was the concept of Bongo Janani, which was the apolitical front of the TMC to reach out to women by highlighting the developmental schemes of the TMC government and the rise in crimes against women in BJP ruled states. In fact, the famous branding of herself as Banglar Nijer Meye also brings in the focus to women centrism. The BJP, on the other hand, also focused on similar women-centric initiatives. For example, Mahila Morcha system was introduced at booth level and ensured that there should be at least one woman member in every mandal and booth committee, the party sources said. What can be deduced from this analysis? What is the impact of women voters on electoral politics? Given the upsurge in women voters and women-centric schemes, students, we can well say that the old disparaging shibboleth about women meekly acting out male diktats at the ballot box needs a burial. While it might be simplistic to think of women as mere notional voters, immune to the lure of identity politics, their overwhelming, decisive presence in politics ought to offer a path to a new political imagination. It is thus clear that women are gaining a strong ground when it comes to voting, but then this should also translate into more women in cabinets, state assemblies and party organizations. Finally, the salience of women voters will definitely influence political parties to undertake a regendering of their respective institutional cultures. But it is undeniable that the silent voters have delivered a resoundingly clear electoral mandate in the recent elections in the country. Thank you, students.